Is there life in the rest of our universe? In this episode, we discuss the probability that it may be abundant.
Is there life in the rest of the universe? It's a good question, but there is many pieces of information that we need to have in order to answer it. Of course, if we look at the abundance of life on our planet, the assumption would be that there should be similar planets in the rest of the universe. From early times in my research, I calculated some of the probabilities, and I came to conclude that there most likely was a lot of life in the universe. I had a lot of difficulties convincing my colleagues at the time because there was assumptions that were made early on that were completely incorrect. One of the assumptions that was made was that it would be rare to find a star that has a planet because most of the environment around stars are pretty harsh, and it would be hard to find a planet then that would be in the Goldilocks zone, or the zone where the planet is not too hot from its star or not too cold away from its star to sustain life. And here we have to make this distinction as well, that we're talking about life as we know it. Now, life can develop in situations and circumstances that we thought impossible. For instance, early on, we thought it was impossible that life would develop in some deep vents inside the ocean where the water is almost boiling and there is almost zero sunlight. We thought life could never sustain in those depths, in those temperature, and in these low light environment. And when we finally built submarines and probes that could go down there, we discovered life that we didn't know existed, that lived down there happily in the dark and in the boiling water. So we have a pretty limited idea of what life needs in order to sustain or to develop. Who says that life could not develop in very, very hot environment, in atmospheres that are completely different gas, like sulfuric gas or nitrogen, very high nitrogen rich gas with, all kinds of things that we think of completely toxic to life here, but that could develop completely differently somewhere else. But this early assumption that planets were very rare around stars started to break apart in the late 90s when we discovered that they seemed to be planets orbiting pulsars. And that really astonished physicists because the environment near a pulsar is very, very harsh. A pulsar is a result of a star that has exploded, a supernova. It was thought that there should be nothing around there, certainly not planets. And so it was kind of surprising to find the first evidence of planets near pulsars. I predicted that they would be there because remember our model of the universe that we discussed earlier, in which the vacuum structure organized in smaller vortices around stars that makes aggregate the matter and makes planets. These vortices would be very, very much prominent after the explosion of a star, which would throw a whole lot of energy into the structure of the vacuum, into the structure of space-time, which would make very strong vortices around that star, and all the material that was ejected by the supernova would be perfect building blocks to build planets around what used to be a star and is now called a pulsar or a black hole. That was astonishing. But since then, we've made great strides in being able to detect planets outside our solar system, and we found many of them. In fact, in 2013, we were astonished to find that there was planets around almost every star we looked at. So there's a lot of planets out there. But the estimate in 2013 was about 40 billion planets in our galaxy that are in the Goldilocks zone, planets that could sustain life as we know it. 40 billion, that is a lot of planets. Well, that's because there's a lot of stars in our galaxy, and most stars have planets, and so the probability of some of these planets to be in the right zone to sustain life is pretty high. So the probability for life, or at least for a planet to be in the right zone to sustain life in our galaxy, is very high. If we extrapolate that to the universe, the numbers are staggering. In 2012, we thought there was about 200 billion galaxies in our universe. We've now updated that in 2016 to about 2 trillion galaxies in our universe. We were missing a few. And if you extrapolate the 40 billion Earth-like planet that would be in those galaxies, you end up with about 80 billion trillion planets that could sustain life in our universe alone. And that is remarkable. So imagine a universe that's teeming with life. However, you need other elements than a good planet in the right zone to get life to emerge. You need elements such as water being, one of the fundamental building blocks of life. And this is one of the arguments I would get from my colleagues in the 90s. Well, even if there's planets out there that could sustain life, they probably don't have water on them because water is extremely rare in our universe. Those assumptions were wrong. In the 90s, in the 2000s, we sent probes out to measure and look for spectral lines of water all over the universe. And we haven't been able to find a place in the universe where there's no water. There's water everywhere. It's remarkable. Even in interstellar space, we see spectral lines of water, which is a very high vacuum. But even as well, intergalactic space has been shown to have water molecules in them. So we see spectral lines of water even between galaxies. So there's water everywhere we look. And in fact, when we look at stars developing, like the birth of stars, typically we see a lot of water in that region, and we see the star forming from the middle of that water, like immense universal placentas birthing stars. So we know that all the building blocks for life are there. They're abundant. The planets that would sustain life are abundant. Some of them are extremely large. Some of them have atmospheres, and so on. And so it is clear that life can and should be found in the universe. And then the complexity of that life is most likely present as well, because for the system to increase in complexity, the abundance of the elements and all the minerals and amino acids and all the stuff that is necessary for life eventually would create this complexity. So all you need is time for the system to have enough feedback structure to eventually, produce the complexity. And this is definitely present, meaning that planetary system in galaxies might be thousands of years older than ours. millions of years older than us, billions of years older than us. And so imagine what complexity can emerge from a system that is billions of years older than us.